That I don't know because it's Jan Station channel.
Oh, it's already running? Okay, I think you're saying it's running. Okay. All right, so we have Jan Helfeld. Jan Helfeld is a unique TV interviewer who uses the Socratic interviewing technique to reveal contradictions in our politicians and journalists' thinking. You can see his interviews on YouTube/Jan Helfeld. Some of the favorites are his interviews with Senator Harry Reid, John McCain, Nancy Pelosi, Pete Stark, and journalists George Stephanopoulos, Chris Matthews, and David Kurgan. Um, we have debating Jan, Victor Pros. Pros. He's a professional Vancouver
Ross.
artist. Vancouver artist, born and raised in Toronto. Victor has rendered numerous international celebrities and Canadian media personalities for commercial and private purposes. His book is Icons and Idols, Pop Goes the Culture. Victor studied under objectivist Professor John Redpath. Okay. And we're going to be using an abbreviated version of the debate rules because Jen is feeling under the weather. And we're going to start there with the opening statements then.
Okay, so my opening spiel.
I guess so. Jan's not
Okay.
objecting, so.
Okay. Okay, I'll begin my opening statement by first stating something in which I'm in full agreement with Jan Helfeld, and no need to worry. We do have significant differences, which is why we're here today. And nothing would be more boring to a debate if both speakers merely agreed with one another. But I do want to indicate from the outset that I do absolutely agree with Jan that politics, like ethics, is a normative branch of philosophy. That's where you'd say I even differ with Walter Block. Political philosophy, by its very nature, is a normative discipline in that it does not just describe political phenomena, but employs norms or standards of value to evaluate political concepts, beliefs, arguments, and actions. So there is a normative standard there. Politics does rest on a system of ethics. Now, this prescriptive aspect is commonly said to constitute the essential difference between political philosophy and political science. The latter, we are told, is purely descriptive in character, and that it's value-free. And when dealing with beliefs about political legitimacy, political scientists don't impose their own judgments on their subject matter. They do not attempt to determine whether such beliefs are right or wrong, justified or unjustified, but confine themselves to describing those beliefs impartially. But I do have my doubts, of course, that so-called political science always lives up to this rigorous demand of being value-free. After all, when a political scientist classifies some regimes as dictatorial or authoritarian, it's difficult to believe that that a negative value judgment is not being imported into the analysis, even if it's just implicitly. So, suffice to say that normative standards in the field of ethical philosophy is very much a part of politics. Politics rests on ethics. I absolutely agree with Jan Helfeld on that issue. And politics that rests on ethics rest on epistemology and metaphysics. But now to get to the meat of where we differ, anarchism and anarchy are undoubtedly the most misrepresented ideas in political theory. Generally, the words are used to mean chaos or without order, and so by implication, anarchists are seen to desire social chaos and the law of the jungle, so-called. And of course, that we get this heavy dose of this type of thought from the objectivist camp. Down from Rand herself to Binswanger to Leonard Peikoff, etc. In fact, objectivist scholar Leonard Peikoff, who is the intellectual heir to objectivist philosopher Ayn Rand, writes this about objectivism, and I quote, "Anarchism is the idea that there should be no government, and in objectivist terms, this amounts to the view that every man should defend himself by using physical force against others whenever he feels like it, with no objective standards of justice, crime, or proof," unquote. First of all, I'll say right out the gate, this is not what anarchism means. No anarchist I know of defends using physical force against others whenever he feels like it as a serious idea to consider. And this usual misrepresentation, or smear to be more precise, Peikoff exhibits ignorance and a reckless disregard for the truth. And for the most part, anarchy has functioned as a political equivalent of hell, the perpetual war of man against every man. As this comes from philosopher Thomas Hobbes, of course. In his famous account, in a so-called state of nature, life would be nasty, brutish, and short. You know, we're all familiar with that. Now, in fact, a society without a government has often been depicted as so horrific and destructive that virtually any kind of government, however brutal or despotic, is preferable to the very idea of anarchy. And of course, that's been a very historically unfortunate point of view. So I'd like to leave aside this caricature of anarchy by the wayside and just move to some basic definitions. I agree with Ayn Rand. Definitions are the guardians of rationality, and terms like anarchy and government have basic established definitions. What is anarchism? A very elementary definition of anarchism would be the absence of government. It's just very descriptive. But why? Why the absence of government? That's where we get to the normative standard. And if we dig a little bit deeper, we can expand the definition of anarchism as opposition to an institution that claims the moral authority to initiate the use of physical force against others. That's a very moral stand that we're taking here. So anarchy simply means without rulers, not without rules. It's a big difference, big difference. And what is the essence, the moral guts, let's say, of anarchy? Moral opposition. Moral opposition. And the type of rulers that anarchists oppose are violent rulers, and they do so guided by a moral principle. Basic definition, anarchism is a political philosophy that advocates stateless societies calling for voluntary institutions. Let me play voluntary under italics, bold italics in my speech. Now the crucial fundamental ethic in question is the non-aggression principle, of course. It's the backbone of civilization. It's not an anarchist doctrine or dictum. Non-aggression is not an optional anarchist doctrine. And from this standpoint, anarchism is not controversial. Voluntarism and the ethics of consent is the backbone of society. And I think any minarchists, libertarians, and anarchists can agree on that. Many classical liberals, if we go step back a little bit further in history, they have tried valiantly to justify the state by referring to a voluntarist standard. Governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, etc., etc., etc. But now we have to ask, what is government? Let's keep to the crucial importance of placing the importance of definition, the importance of proper definitions into the as our standard. What is the essential fundamental characteristic that separates government from any other social institution? What attribute or distinguishing characteristic unites all governments under a common definition? Of course, there's many types of governments. The term government subsumes theocracy, absolute monarchy, Nazism, fascism, democratic socialism, and any other number of sundry dictatorships. And of course, it'll be argued today that the purpose, so-called purpose of government, is to protect individual rights, but that's hardly a definition, or a proper definition. Fascism and socialist regimes are also governments, but they hardly can be said to be institutions that protect individual rights, of course. It's laughable to think that. So if we do get a basic, fundamental, all-encompassing definition of government, we can say this: a government is an institution that holds the exclusive power to enforce certain rules of social conduct in a given geographical area. I'll repeat that. A government is an institution that holds the exclusive power to enforce certain rules of social conduct in a given geographical area. This basic definition speaks to all governments. It speaks to Soviet Russia, it speaks to North Korea, it speaks to Nazi Germany, and it speaks to the American government. To hold exclusive power, the state must initiate force against people, thus violating individual rights and the non-aggression principle right at the core. You've taken the carpet right up from the feet of it. Government is force. The initiation of force, if that's not a part of the equation in this definition, then it's not a government. We're talking about some other institution. This is not a controversial statement to say that government is force. Ayn Rand, the arch advocate of a constitutional republic, will tell you that government is force. Barack Obama will tell you that government is force. George Washington will tell you that government is force. Now, basically, in regards to free market defense and so forth, all the purported reasons to which it's said that we need a government can be supplied in a free market society. There has been books and scores of literature dealing with this issue. We have such books, for example, I'll drop a few names here. The Market for Liberty by Morris and Linda Tennell. And there's also the book For a New Liberty by Murray Rothbard. And then we have George H. Smith, who's discussed the key problems associated with procedural justice in his book Justice, Entrepreneurship in a Free Market, and Justice, Entrepreneurship Revisited, a Reply to Critics. So the point here is that there's a good deal of literature that deals with these issues of justice and applying individual rights and law and jurisprudence and so forth. So the whole point here, just to conclude and make my final statement here, is to say that you will find, that you won't find in any of these books a calling for a return to the jungle. Thank you. That's it.
Okay. Jan? All right, you've got 10 minutes.
Okay, let me make a few quick points here. I don't say that the anarchists desire the law of the jungle. What I say is that the law of the jungle is the result of anarchism, whether they like it or not. See, so we agree on what a government is, but I think Victor is equivocating on. At one point he says that government, and I agree, has the monopoly of major force and uses force, but to use force isn't necessarily to initiate force. Another part of his argument, he is saying that the government necessarily initiates force. No, the government doesn't have to initiate force. The government is formed, a limited government is formed, which is the one that I'm defending, in order to protect the individual rights of the citizens. And when the government uses force, it has to use the force for that purpose. And basically what has happened is that a group of people have got together and decided that they want and need a government, and in our case in the United States, luckily a constitutional government with a limited government, where we want to have a government that is there to protect our individual rights, our right to life, liberty, and property. And so that is what the reason for forming a government is, and there's no need to initiate force. The issue about initiating force occurs, and I'll deal with later in the rest of the debate, when some people disagree and they say, look, we think we can live fine without a government. That's a new phenomenon, and I think in a limited government it should be dealt with forthrightly and peacefully. Basically, my view is that in order to optimize the possibility of a happy life, we need a government, but one that's limited to protecting the individual rights of the citizens. I agree with Jefferson that governments are instituted, in the Declaration of Independence it says, to secure these rights, the ones I just mentioned, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, governments are instituted. That's the purpose. And that principle of the non-initiation of physical force is what we have to see going forward when we want to evaluate whether the government is doing the right thing or the wrong thing, who is right and who is wrong, who is violating whose rights. It's a very useful principle within a particular context. The part of the context of that principle is that there's a limited government. People that don't want to have a government cannot be integrated with people that do. So it's obvious they have to separate and secede. And I think they should have that right. Anyway, anarchism creates two classes of people. The people that have military force and the ones that don't. So right from the onset, it eliminates the principle of equality under the law. It definitely leads to the law of the jungle and a state of nature, because under anarchism, there is no government, so people can organize however they wish. And the principle that operates is the principle that the stronger of power, a person, bullies the weak. The weak have to accede to what the stronger person wants, or the stronger organization wants. So that's why it's the law of the jungle, because that's how the jungle operates. It's about when the wolf has killed the deer and the bear comes, the wolf has to leave. And this is what happens in anarchism when there is no government. People organize in different ways, all sorts of ways, and there isn't any law to prevent it. And so when somebody with a lot of power is in a dispute with somebody with a little bit of power, say the owner of a DRO is in a dispute with you. Well, if he has an army and troops and you don't, you're just going to have to accept what he says. So the anarchist who's looking to avoid having to follow any law that he doesn't like ends up having to follow numerous contradictory laws that he doesn't like. And he also has to back down against everybody who has superior power to him. The same thing happens between DROs. The one that has the most military hardware, the most power, is the one that the other DRO has to kowtow. And the same thing happens between DROs and criminal gangs. The one that has the most power, the stronger one, is the one that rules. The weaker one has to accede. That's why they call it the law of the jungle. Now, the key thing here is that there can be no justice without written, objective law that applies to everyone. That's necessary in order for there to be fairness. Why? Because you need to know what the law is before you take your action, so you can decide whether to take an action or not. And under anarchism, you do not know what the law is. See, under our limited government, or at least even in the welfare state, we know that in Texas the law is whatever the Texas legislator has put in place, and the federal law, so we know what the law is. And if we travel over to Arkansas, we know that the law may have changed, so we can check. But in an anarchist society, there's every DRO ascribes to whatever legal system they want. So there can be Sharia law, Mormon law, ecological law, Texas law, common law, Roman law, and there's variations on every aspect of the law, on the criminal law, on the criminal procedure, on the civil law, civil procedure, inheritance law, tort law, everything can be different, and you don't know even what it is. It's basically impossible not to be afoul of the law because you don't know what the law will be. And that is one of the big defects of anarchism. It's impossible for it to be a fair system. Now, there's a lot of examples that you can use to prove this. I mean, so for example, some DROs believe in abortion, that it should be legal. Others, that it's murder. Now, you cannot arbitrate that. Some people, some DROs think that if you sign a contract when you're 19, it's valid. Others think, no, you have to be 21. Some think that if you have sex with a lady when she's 17, it's statutory rape. Others think not. Now, if the owner of
8 minutes.
8 minutes. What?
That was 8 minutes.
That was 8 minutes.
The statements are 10 minutes, I thought.
Yeah, but you said 2
Yeah, but you
minutes
said
all
2 minutes all
statements.
open
So
statements.
if you want,
You want
do 8 minutes.
Well, okay, well, what did Victor take?
I think he did
I
10,
think he
but
did 10,
I had
but I had
trouble with the timer.
Well, why do you interrupt me then? If he did 10, then why am I going to do 10?
I'm not sure.
I'm not
I just
sure.
thought I'd let you know.
I'll let you know.
Okay. I'll take 2 more minutes. I'm going to take 2 minutes if it's okay with Victor. Okay. As I was saying, there's differences of opinion between the DROs and on all sorts of issues, and every difference of opinion is a potential war between the two parties, because these parties have armies, and if one isn't far superior to the other, like I said, then like in the jungle, sometimes the parties cannot evaluate who is the strongest, and they go at each other. And that's a mini war right here in the United States. So that's, if a lot of anarchists think that they can resolve everything with arbitration, arbitration doesn't, you cannot arbitrate whether you should go to jail 10 years for a statutory rape or not at all, or whether you should go to prison for life because you murdered someone or not go to jail at all. The happy medium is go to jail for 10 years or for 5. Nobody will accept that, especially if they are the owner of a DRO. And anarchism increases criminality in several ways. It increases them because under a limited government, everybody is protected. But when there is no government, there's a lot of stragglers out there that aren't organized, that don't sign up with DROs, that don't have alliances. Those people are immediate victims. They're weak, and they'll be prey to the criminals. And some of the DROs that will just want to say, we'll never go to war because war is expensive, and they just have a few policemen there. Well, those will be picked off by the criminal gangs as well. Now, sometimes the people will miscalculate, and then we'll have a mini war. And that's why anarchism results in war in the streets in the United States or in Canada, as the place may be.
That's
Now,
10 minutes.
That's 10 minutes.
Okay.
All right, so
All
we're
right,
going to
so
do the 12 questions, cross-examine.
You didn't understand even what we had agreed.
You said rebuttal.
You said rebuttal.
That word isn't
That
used in
word's
your
in use
rules.
in your rules. So
So if you want
So
to
if you want
go to the refutation,
refutation,
that's the word you use?
that's the word
I'm
you
willing
use.
to go where Jan wants, and we can explain.
Explain that.
If you want to continue,
You want to
Jan,
continue,
that's
Jan,
great.
that's great.
But I'll let you.
I'll let you-
But if you want to,
if you want
a bridge version and continue in a part 2, I'll leave it up to you.
I'll leave it up to you.
I'm willing to do either. Anything.
Okay, great.
Okay, great.
Continue.
Great.
So,
So,
I can
continue,
my question. Do
or-
mute yourself, gentlemen. Do mute yourself, and I'll begin with questions.
With question.
Yeah, if you're up for the
Yeah, if
question,
you're up for the questions,
we'll continue.
we'll continue.
The question comes now.
Right.
Right.
Starting from me,
Starting from me.
right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, but
Okay.
gentlemen, mute yourself.
Mute yourself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
affirmative. You go first,
You go first,
Victor.
Victor.
Okay,
Okay.
and you can hear me. I can still hear an echo.
Hear an
so
echo.
I'm fully muted on
Hello?
all people. Okay, we're all good?
Hello?
Okay, we're all good.
Nope, I still hear an
No,
echo.
I still hear an echo.
Somebody's not muted.
Somebody's not muted.
I take it the
I take it
moderator.
to moderate.
Jan, are you able to
Jan, are
mute
you
yourself?
able to?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear
Yeah,
you.
I
You're
can
not
hear you.
muted.
You're not muted.
I just muted myself 3 times.
Testing 1, 2.
Testing 1, 2.
Echo.
Still an echo.
Still an echo.
Okay, now you're muted, Jan. All right, Victor, go ahead.
All right, excellent. Thank you. A little bit of technical difficulties, it happens.
Each
Okay,
question for 20 seconds. Go.
first question. Sorry, what's that?
20 seconds for a question.
Oh, sure, sure.
Okay, go.
Okay, first question. Okay, now let me just select the question I want to ask. Okay, now Jan, what about the issue? Since you bring it up in your presentation, what about the issue of different and sometimes conflicting legal systems that can be found in various states? Here we have different agencies enforcing different laws in a variety of different schemes, whether that be Chicago, from California to Memphis, Tennessee to Boston, you know, whatever. Should we,
That's 20
as
seconds.
Alexander Hamilton recommended during the Constitutional Convention, effectively abolish the states, reducing them instead to administrative units of the federal government, that single agency charged with the responsibility of defining objective law, to quote objectivists? And would you think that that would be a good idea?
Okay, that was 50
Yeah, that was
seconds.
50 seconds.
Yeah, you cannot be, he cannot be muted because he has to be able to tell you time. Anyway, as far as what I understood, you're asking, what about the fact that different states have different laws, like I said in my statement? And isn't that a problem? No, it's not a problem because states are big, and when you cross from one state to the other, there's a sign there. It says, you're entering X state. So now you're warned that the legal jurisdiction, legal system that you're entering is a new one, a different one. And you also know that if you want to know whether it's legal to have sex with that young lady or not when she's 17, you can look it up. But when you are in an anarchist society and you're in a bar, you don't know what DRO she belongs to, and she can even lie to you and tell you one thing or the other. And guess what? If you have sex with her, according to one DRO, you committed statutory rape. But you say, oh, my DRO says that if she's over 16, it's okay. Well, arbitrate that. Nobody will go willingly to jail based on that kind of situation, and that's an impossible situation to arbitrate. And this occurs in every aspect of life. So under the present system, under a limited government, even under a welfare state, you know what the law is, or at least you can find out.
Time.
Time.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. No,
Okay, yeah. No,
I
I
understand.
understand.
I'm happy to hear his
I'm happy
answer
to
in
hear his
full. You don't
answer.
really have to rigorously chop him at the bit, you know. If his question goes over a little bit, that's okay. But
Second question, I
so
guess.
it's just a matter of asking my following up questions then. Whatever I want to ask, is that it? Okay.
Yeah, it says.
Okay. First, a very simple question out for the gate, and how Jan just answered on that question, I can cover in a rebuttal. I'd like to deal with that question. But a question that I do have now: would you favor one government for the entire world, so long as that government fulfilled objectivist criteria, most especially the objectivist model of government? Favor one government of the entire world if it was a government that in fact did protect individual rights.
Time. All right.
No, I don't favor a world government, And the reason is that one world government can go wrong, and then there's no place to escape. And people that still want to have limited government can't find a place where they can go because the whole world is taken. So one world government is a bad idea, even if initially they think it's going to be limited or not. That's the thing, you can't guarantee it. And that's part of the problem with anarchism, where anarchists like yourself who are committed to non-initiation of physical force would like to have that kind of society, but there's no guarantee that it's going to work out like that. So essentially similar reasoning.
Okay.
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 All
You can
right.
hear
You
me,
can
is that
hear
right?
it, is that right?
Yep.
Yep. You're on your
I hear the echo.
I hear the echo.
Oh yeah, Jen.
Oh yeah, Jen.
Okay, given that what you
Given
said,
that
and I
what you
do
said,
agree.
and I do agree.
Oh, I'm
Not
still
muted yet.
echo chamber. We're testing 1, 2, 3. Oh, so
Okay, you're muted now. Good. All right. Third question for Victor.
yeah, I'm going to follow on this coattail of what we're on. The idea of an objective or a Randian government, or whatever you want to call it, a government that protects individual rights. You wouldn't want a world government in case things go askew, which has had, of course, as history has proven to be very devastating, to say the least. But would you not agree, though, that when a company is egregious and does something criminal or is just a bad company and therefore goes out of business as a result, don't you think that the chances of devastation that is only confined to the employees of that company and to the people directly involved, but does not devastate an entire country as when you have a government that goes askew? And that's why, and I agree, who wants a world government in case something goes wrong? Then the whole world is screwed,
Can you hear
not
me,
just the
Victor?
company, people that work for it or deal with it too.
Are you able to hear me, Victor? Oh, 20 seconds isn't very long, but were you muting me or something, Victor? Because I tried to warn you.
My turn?
No, I'm just muting and I'm muting myself. I'm not trying to do anything to you. But Jen heard my question.
Well, I don't think that the analogy holds, because in one case you're dealing with a country, which is, in another case you're dealing with a company. Companies can go out of business. That isn't a catastrophe for everyone. And I don't see what that has to do with. I didn't see the relationship actually of why you think one thing is related to the other.
Okay.
Okay.
If that's it, then the fourth question. Oh, looks like he's muted. Victor shows muted to me.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me?
Yeah, now you're back.
Okay. Okay. And yeah, no. What I'm saying is that if you have a DRO, okay, that let's say that it does something egregious, okay, and it like an attempt of gathering military because it wants to take over other DROs or take over a whole geographical area known as a country. Let's say it has that ill design. It depends upon a customer base, but if something goes askew, it goes out of business, or if it's raises its rates to meet the demands of gathering large-scale weaponry. But but when a government goes askew, it prints money. It's able to fund itself through force. It does not have a voluntary customer base. It has the exclusive means of control, and gathers its revenue through taxation and through that indirect form of taxation known as inflation.
Okay.
That's what I mean by having greater devastation upon a country, which a DRO does not have the chance to at the same scale.
All right. Do you guys want to limit the question to 20 seconds or what?
This is the format we're supposed to follow it. That's but I said you can give a person 5 or 10 seconds extra to finish the thought.
Okay.
Okay.
Anyway, it's okay. I don't care. But it can't be an argument in the question. That's the problem. Anyway, when a particular DRO tries to take over, in other words, for example, they go for nuclear weapons. The first DRO that gets nuclear weapons, everybody's going to have to kowtow to that DRO. And if two of them happen to reach that end of getting nuclear weapons at the same time, and they have a dispute and they go at each other, you have a nuclear war right there in Canada. So that doesn't happen when you have a limited government, because the government will not go to war with itself. And the fact that the government has nuclear weapons or large amounts of soldiers and jets and military hardware does not pose a problem to the citizenry as long as it's under civilian control, like it is in the United States and in Canada. So the generals are not ordering everybody around and telling them what to do, what they have to do. They don't have the power. But under anarchism, the person with the military hardware does have the power, and everybody else has to kowtow to them. That's why they call it the law of the jungle.
Okay.
Okay.
Fifth question to Victor.
Okay, very good. Okay, perfect. Now I'll move along to another question. If we accept the premise that individuals, and only individuals, possess equal and reciprocal rights, and if we condemn as illegitimate all governments that rule without consent, then all governments, past and present, have been illegitimate. Would you agree with that?
Time.
Can you repeat the question? Somehow I didn't grasp exactly what you were saying.
Sure. I can. Okay. If we accept the premise that individuals, and only individuals, possess equal and reciprocal rights, in other words, there's no such thing as group rights, and I'm coming from an entirely objectivist base here, that only the individual can possess rights. Okay. And if we condemn as illegitimate all governments that rule without consent, as historical governments have, of course, they rule without consent, then all those governments, past and present, have been illegitimate because they do not rule with the consent of the individual who possesses individual rights. Would you agree that that's been the standard mayfare of governments that rule without consent?
Well, I agree that throughout history, most of the governments have been statist, and I'm not advocating for statist governments, and they have governed without consent, or they have acquired their consent by the barrel of the gun, like Mao Zedong said, and I think they are illegitimate and wrong, and I don't advocate that. In a limited government, as I said in my opening statement, is premised on the idea that people want, and these people, they think that they want and need a limited government dedicated to protecting their individual rights. So they organize to form this kind of government. Now, at the time that they did, everybody agreed. There weren't any anarchists that I know of saying there shouldn't be any government at all. Nobody made that case because they all agreed that there should be a government. The people that came to the United States knew that there was a limited government. They knew was a constitution, and then they agreed to come here implicitly because they knew where they were going, so they accepted the system. So they also agreed that there should be a government and that it should be limited, or unfortunately less limited now than before. But as I said, if you have a situation where a substantial number of people like yourself say, look, we disagree radically with you. We think all government is illegitimate. We don't want to have any government. I think a limited government should permit such people the opportunity to organize, to buy land, and then to secede and have their anarchist experiment. And I'm all for that. That's the only way that the situation can be resolved, respecting everybody's view on what optimizes their possibility of a happy life, what optimizes their possibility of maximum individual right protection. That's what political theory is all about, or at least rational political theory. What maximizes your possibility of optimizing your protection of your individual rights. And so they can try that experiment somewhere else, within the country, within Canada, or within the United States.
Okay.
All right. So then you are do mute, gentlemen.
Oh, Jan mute.
Okay, very good. Okay, so you're saying that there's two different types of governments in this, say, and when I say two different types of government, I don't mean like a democracy or Nazism. Like the two different types are, there's a government by consent, and then you have historical governments that have ruled without consent. Now, what is the difference between those two types of government? Would you say that the government that rules without consent has been those governments that have imposed taxes?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The difference is that one government, limited government, is, as it says in our Declaration of Independence and in the Constitution, is dedicated to protecting the individual rights of the citizens. And it derives its just governance from the consent of the governed. And that was the purpose of forming such a government. The statist government does not. Does that answer your question?
I guess that's his answer.
It doesn't answer my question. So I'm trying to distinguish the difference between, and I'm on echo. If you want to mute, and I'll clarify my question here it's fully understood. There we go. Yeah, no, I'm trying to. I'm still on echo. There we go. Testing 1, 2. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No. I'm trying to distinguish the difference between a government that has, throughout history, that has not ruled by consent, whereas supposedly and allegedly the American form of government has. Now, what is the difference between a government that rules without consent versus the government that does rule consent? Would that be that a government that rules without consent takes the form of imposing taxes by force? Would that be the key factor in a government that does not rule without consent? Is the form that the non-consent government imposes tax?
No, that's not the difference.
Okay. I guess that's all. All right, that's his answer.
Well, I'd like to hear what the difference is. I don't know if it qualifies as another question or a point of clarification. I'm asking for what the difference is then. What is the difference if not imposed enforced taxation, then what is the difference between a government of consent versus a government that rules without so-called consent? How is this non-consent taking place? How is it manifested?
Is this another question or the same question?
I don't know if we
I don't know if we
count the seventh or no.
no.
Okay, well,
No. It's a question that hasn't been answered.
okay, well, okay, well, let's. You asked me if the difference was whether it was whether in one country they have taxes and the other they don't. That's not the difference. The difference is that, as I said before, when it's based on consent of the governed, like in the United States, for example, we had a Declaration of Independence where we stated our purpose of forming a new government, and the people consented through their representatives democratically. The people that came later consented by coming here and knowing where they were going, and everybody agreed that they needed a government. There was differences of opinion about what kind. There was some that were monarchs that wanted to have the king continue to rule, others that wanted a republic, a constitutional republic. Fortunately, the constitutional republic people prevailed, and the consent of the citizens is renewed periodically through elections, and they continue to vote for this government, and senators and congressmen and presidents, governors, etc., local level, federal level, statewide, etc. So the consent of the government is constant. In a state government, that doesn't occur there, and that's the difference.
Okay, just so you know, that was 27. So we're just to give you a feeling.
You just enforce the rules, moderator. Just say what does, you know.
Okay. I said time. Did you hear me when I said time?
No, I didn't hear it.
Oh, I said it.
I said it. Is it?
Okay.
Is it my turn to ask questions?
So we're on the seventh question. If we're going to do 12 questions, if you still both want to do that.
How many?
I'm on my seventh.
Seventh.
Oh, the seventh. Oh, okay. Well, there's plenty of questions left. Let's go.
All right. Seventh question. 20 seconds.
And we agreed that we was going to do 10 questions, right? So.
All right. We'll do 10.
What isn't that? We agreed.
My seventh question. 3 more.
All right, go ahead.
Okay.
When you're ready.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I'll consider this the 8th question. I don't feel that I really had the answer that I've heard the alleged and asserted that the American government is a government by consent. But let me just ask simply then, to speak of other historical governments that have ruled without consent, how is it that they were governments that ruled without consent? Why? What is being done there that it makes it a government that rules without consent?
Time.
Would it be because they impose taxation or some other reason, or because of taxation and also other reasons? What is a government that rules without consent? What's taking place there? What are they doing?
Okay.
Well, let's take a few examples. Say Mao Zedong took over the country by military force, and he said that he ruled by the power of the gun, or force of the barrel of the gun. And they didn't have elections, and they did what. There was no constitutional convention. There was no Declaration of Independence. There was no commitment to protecting the individual rights of the citizens. It's a totalitarian dictatorship. Same thing with Stalin or any number of tyrants. Kim Jong-un in North Korea, he inherited the government from his father. There was no consent from the government or even a commitment to having a government dedicated to the protection of the individual rights of the citizens.
Time.
So it has nothing to
That
do
was
with
time.
the taxes or non-taxes.
Okay.
Okay.
Victor, you said
Okay.
that was your
Victor,
eighth
you said that
question?
was your eighth question?
Yeah, that constitutes an eighth.
All right.
Okay, now the government can't exist except by funding itself, and so the issue of imposed taxation has been problematic to for a lot of philosophers in the Enlightenment area that tried to create a government of checks and balances, and that leads to a question that if we speak of Ayn Rand, that she called for what was called a
Time.
voluntary contributions to the government because she, as far as she's concerned, taxation was the imposition of force. That it did
Okay.
violate individual rights. So the solution to this, in full acknowledgement, was to set up have ideas of voluntary contributions to the government. Would you agree with Rand?
Okay, that was 54 seconds. It's kind of hard to ask questions in 20
questions
seconds
in 20
sometimes.
seconds sometimes.
Well, he's going over the time by a lot,
Yeah.
making an argument. Anyway, no, you want to talk about Rand? Rand said that she was going to leave this taxation issue up to someone else, that she could not figure it out. She couldn't get out of the quandary of how to support the government and have taxes. By the way, in the beginning, I thought that the problem with all the anarchists was that they just didn't want to pay the taxes. As long as they didn't have to pay the taxes, everything's fine. But obviously, that's not true. They have a problem with every single law. Every single law is illegitimate because it comes from the government. So it's not about taxes. If it was about taxes, maybe you could find some way to shame people that didn't want to pay taxes into paying voluntarily. But anyway, the solution, the issue of the taxes, in my view, is a bogus issue in this sense.
1 minute.
Yeah. I'm going to continue because he wants to know the answer, right? Do you want to know, Victor, what I think or not? Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Well, here's the as I explained before, if you have a social institution that is empowered, who is authorized to enact and enforce laws, and they have a monopoly on major force, like we agreed before, like Victor properly said. They're going to perform a function. Obviously, this function, which should be the protection of the individual rights, has to be compensated. The people that are receiving the protection have to pay for it. And that is the legitimate reason why you can impose taxes. I don't see any problem with the taxes as long as it's not redistribution of wealth, as long as the money is being used for the proper political functions of a limited government. The courts, the police, the army, then they have a right. It's just like if a security guard you hire a security guard, and then he requires you to pay him, and you say, no, I don't want to pay. No, you have to pay. And that's obviously implied in the request that you form a government and that they perform those functions. So if Rand thinks, it's open, I think, but if Rand thinks that all taxation is illegitimate, I disagree.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So the 10th question. Last question.
Last question.
And try to wait, think about it, wait till you formulate it, and see if you can get it in 20 seconds. Oh, you're on mute. Victor, you're on mute. Yeah, you're on mute again. You went off for a second. Now you're there. Okay.
You can hear me okay. Yeah, okay. Sorry, what number of questions am I at right now?
You're on your 10th question, which should be the last one under
Okay.
abbreviated.
Well, I guess I better make it count then. Okay. Right. Would you say that how would you differentiate government from any other social institution if it is a government by consent? If people need the services that the government is supplying, would you limit that to the military for defense against foreign invaders, the law courts for settling contractual disputes, and the police for citizen-on-citizen crimes, let's say? Would you say that it is only the government to provide those services? And if there were to be competing agencies following the same guidelines, not Sharia law, this, that, and the other, but simply competing in the terms of efficiency by the same procedural, judicial standards of jurisprudence and objective law, etc., would you say that the government, nevertheless, is to cease and desist those activities from those services being offered, and would you justify and say yes, they are to step in and impose force?
The problem with having competing defense or protection agencies is that when you have a conflict between them and another DRO, you have the possibility, the potential of a mini war inside your country. The reason why you need a monopoly of physical force is to prevent that eventuality and to prevent all of the deviations from the scenario that you are talking about, where they just want to do a limited protection of individual rights, and that they all agree on what the law should be and how to go about this protection. When you have different people with military hardware and major force, which is the scenario you're talking about, you're just looking for trouble. There's going to be a mini war in the country, and that will destroy the whole country. Besides the fact that there will be disagreements about what the law should be and what it shouldn't be, and even well-intentioned people, rational, well-intentioned people, have genuine disagreements about how these rights should be protected. And like I said, I gave a lot of examples. It's not that some of them are evil and others aren't. It's that a lot of these things, it really doesn't matter. Either it's 19 years to sign a contract or 21, but you got to make up your mind what it is. It's either statutory rape when she's 17 or it isn't. But if you have all reasonable people can come to differences of opinion. Now the problem is that these differences of opinion are backed up by military might, and when they have a difference, they go at each other, and that's a war. And that's why you cannot. You need a monopoly of major force.
Well, I guess that concludes my question. Be on the next stage.
Okay. So we're going to do 12 questions from
12? Did
10.
he do 12?
10. I'm reading from your rules.
Is it always morally wrong to initiate physical force against someone who has not violated anybody's rights, including a situation where you're under extreme duress? With that, your life dependent on violating the other person's rights, would it still be morally wrong?
Yes.
Yes.
Violating somebody's
Violating somebody's
right
right
is
is
always
always
wrong.
wrong.
Okay.
That was an easy
That was an
one.
easy one.
Yeah. If you were dying of thirst, would you try to steal some water if the only person that had some refused to give or sell you any, and therefore you would just die of thirst?
You'll have to
We'll have to
unmute for
mute
this
for
one.
this one.
What's that?
My
What's
answer
that?
won't be.
Answer.
I do mute, gents, so my answer won't be so succinct.
Okay.
Testing 1, 2. Okay,
Yep.
just get rid of the annoying echo there. Um, yeah, I can't answer a question like that on just a strict yes or no basis. I do believe that, as you've made clear in other debates, that ethics is contextual, not relativistic, but contextual. I also, and this is according to the rules that have been provided to me, I do have a problem with the premise of the question on a number of fronts, and I'll just name a few. Number one, I do the such questions that Rand has covered in her essay, the emergency of ethics, where she talks about like unrealistic, scary scenarios that don't speak to everyday problems, which is ethics is to address itself to, as opposed to these lifeboat situations, is kind of rather a cynical attempt to invalidate ethical inquiry altogether by of a nihilistic streak. I don't think it's so simple as just to say that I'm dying of thirst. I mean, we're talking about a
Uh,
quench here where I've had a couple of munchies, or we're talking about how is it that I'm dying of thirst? That nothing is available to me in a civilization, in a small town or in a city. Am I in the Sahara Desert where there's nobody to appeal to? It just isn't realistic. It just isn't realistic.
okay. Third question.
No.
Was it?
He didn't answer whether he would or he wouldn't. What's your answer? A yes or no? And by the way, you can question if you think that one of my questions has a false premise, then it's up to you, Victor, to prove what is the false premise. And I'll read the question to you again so that you can either answer yes or no, or say this has a false question. Now, if you were dying of thirst, literally dying because you're lost in the woods and you can't find your way and you find a cabin that has some water, would you try to steal some if the only person that had some, the owner of the cabin, had refused to give or sell you any? So up to now you haven't answered yes or no, and you did say that the premise was false. You had a problem with the premise, but you didn't say it was false. So your only way to avoid the question is to say this question has a false premise, and then we can discuss which is the false premise in that question.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
I need I need a yes or a no, unless you want to get into the issue that you raised about the premise.
I believe the
I
rules
believe
also
the
said
rules
you
also
could say
said
I don't know.
I don't know.
Okay. No, I'm happy to
Okay, no, I'm
answer.
happy to answer.
Thanks
But
a lot.
But
good up, gents.
Jens.
Yeah. Okay. Going by the concrete examples that you're talking about, I'm not out in the Safari Desert where I've been stranded for maybe weeks and weeks before I get to the point of dying of thirst. I'm in the woods, and which there is people reside, and there's not just that one lone cabin guy. I imagine that there's a township nearby. But to answer the question, no, I would not, against his wishes. Once again, another real unrealistic premise is just who is this curmudgeon psychotic person anyway that won't help a brother out. But okay, I respect his rights. But I hardly see myself in a situation where I am dying of thirst. That's what I consider to be unrealistic, and that's what I think is ridiculous, because if I'm in a township, I'm in the woods where there's somebody residing and living there, surely there's other people. It's not the last thing that I have as an option open to me.
So I heard that he said he would not, but he also thought the situation was not realistic.
Hardly.
But you aren't disputing that that situation can happen, as well as others where you're under extreme duress, and you're in a quandary as to whether to violate somebody's rights or survive, and you would choose dying and not violating the rights. Is that correct?
No, I would not
That,
violate his right in that stance. And no, I do not believe that it's such that it's so dire that I would be dying.
Wait. I didn't.
There could be other examples where it comes to a life and death issue. That's not one of them. I just don't agree with the premise.
You disagree with the premise that a person can find themselves in that situation where they're in the woods and they're dying of thirst, and the only person that has the water there refuses to give them any. That's not possible? Are you saying that that's not possible, Victor?
now you muted yourself.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay, there we go. Yeah. No, I don't. Just to make to clarify, I do not deny that one can get lost into the fields. No, I do not deny that you can come across somebody that lives there among other people. Just how far from civilization am I if somebody is living in the woods? And of course, it's not impossible that somebody could deny me the privilege of providing me with water. But I disagree with the premise that it's not long before I will find myself, if I keep on trudging along, to find other people. Unlike being in the Sahara Desert where I don't know where the hell I am, and I'm hundreds and thousands of miles east, south, west, and north from any person or any form of township.
I don't know. I think I heard some conflicting answer to some extent, but I think he originally answered that he said no, he would not. So, okay. So he seemed to give a thumbs up to that. So I think whether he agrees or disagrees with the premise, he gave an answer about what he would do. Okay, so I guess we can move on to the fourth question.
Third. Just my third question, because all that was the second.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
What is your ultimate value? And let me clarify what I mean by that. An end which is not a means to any other end, what they call the supreme good, the Greeks call the supreme good ultimate value, the one that organizes your ethics. What is your ultimate value, Victor?
Sure. Do mute up, gent. I will give a sufficient answer on this one. It won't be terribly brief. There we go. Okay. Yeah, this is where the former objectivist comes out in me. That absolutely, like, my ultimate value would be my my life, of which no other values aren't possible without my life. And all the activities that I take towards that ultimate end is, of course, to objectivist ethics would be certainly rationality is on the top list, pride, etc., and so forth. But I think another ultimate value can also be happiness, to which is all activities taken are not a means to an end, but happiness is the end. You don't get happy in order to reach some other end. By which happiness is the means. Happiness is the end, by which all the things that you undertake in your life towards that ultimate goal, mistakenly or appropriately, it all depends. But we all want to be happy as an end in itself. And life itself, like according to the objectivist ethics, of which I agree, is life is the standard value.
Okay, time. Okay. Now it's the fourth question, right?
So the way you hold the principle of NAP in the previous example will lead to your destruction. In other words, it will lead to the eradication of your life, of your ultimate value. So isn't that prima facie evidence that this principle, the way you hold it, is not furthering your ultimate value, and therefore you're applying it incorrectly because it does not achieve what it's supposed to, which is to further your life?
Yeah, no, once again, if we want to digress back to that question, I do not, as I said then, consider it so dire that my life is at risk. But, of course, in following the objectivist ethics in which the life of the individual matters, and to sustain life, you do not achieve that by violating the rights of others. That's not one of the methods that Rand would endorse, that in order to survive, it's necessary, therefore, or as a part of the equation, to violate the rights of others. That is not an objectivist standard.
Okay, finished early.
Victor, now you're rejecting the premise of the question, which was that if you didn't steal the water, you would die. That's the premise. That's the situation you're in, under extreme duress. The issue is when you're under extreme duress and you had to violate somebody's rights, you said, I will not violate them. That's what you said before. If you want to go back to the record, you said, no, I would not do it. Under the premises of that question, which were, if you didn't, you were going to die. I said it several times, explained it to you. So, aren't you then advocating a principle that the way you hold it, because the principle works fine in the proper context, but the way you hold it would lead to the destruction of your ultimate end, which is your life, and therefore something's wrong. You're applying the principle incorrectly. Is that not true?
Okay. Okay.
Testing 1, 2, 3. There we go. Okay. It's a very tricky mute situation there. Okay. Mr. Moderator, as I've made clear that I've answered that question. I don't violate rights, and I do not consider the exact example to the letter of how the concrete example is set up as a life-threatening situation. However, I would like to make a suggestion. I can give quarter to Jan to, let's say that there is a dire situation that actually does depend upon life and death, and that might be the case of where I'm trapped out in the waters. I'm drowning and a boat comes by, etc. If I'd be happy to answer that one. I know that Jan has posted before, and I consider that to be more of a urgent, dire situation of life and death versus being in the woods of civilization where there's a lot of other people around. Now I'm just out. Now I'm out in the river, out in godforsaken. I don't know where I am, and a boat comes by. I'd be happy to answer that.
The premise of the question was that you were dying of thirst, and there wasn't anybody else, any other place to get the water. Now you're denying the premises and saying, oh, well, there's other people there, I could go visit them, etc. That is not under extreme duress. And so the whole point here is, will you violate somebody's rights if you're under extreme duress and your life dependent on it? I explained it to you in principle, and I explained it to you in an example. Now you're disputing whether the example is extreme duress. This is the example is extreme duress. You're going to die of thirst if you don't get that water, and there isn't any other place to get it, and there's just one guy there living in hundreds of miles of woods, and you can't get any other place water. That was the premise of the question, and you said you would die. You would prefer to die than violate that person's rights. Is that not true, or you want to change your answer?
You can hear me?
You can hear
Yes.
me?
Okay. Okay. Yeah. No. I stand steadfast by that exact example as given to me. I do not consider to be realistic. That is the objection that I take. But I'll
Yeah,
be happy to take a dire situation,
Victor, if you could
which
just,
life and death is.
yeah, just answer the
Sorry about that. Yeah,
question.
I got the echo.
Yeah, if you could just answer it with whatever example would fulfill that
Yeah.
premise,
Okay.
then that would be the same equivalent, I believe.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm sorry. We can have a separate debate on conundrum ethics. I'm happy to do that. But in the attempt to answer the question though, because I just happen to disagree with that example, that exact example. But let's take a life and death example though. We could take the case of where would lying, or we could take the case of where I'm out in the river, as I said previously, a boat comes by, would I violate the guy's property rights, his boat rights, or whatever, to save my life? And I'm trying to get on board the boat, or otherwise I'm going to drown. The guy's knocking me away with his paddle. Get away from me! You're violating my rights. I don't want you on my boat. Get out of here! Get out of here! Well, that's the case of I'm not violating his rights. I fight to the bitter end to save my life, and that's exactly what the context is. I do absolutely agree with Mr. Helfield that in the sense of that ethics is contextual, and this is objectivist ethics all the way. Objectivist ethics 101 on this. Ethics is contextual, not relativistic. Not relativistic. In that case, the context is I'm trying to save my life, not violate his rights. My intention, an act is not to violate rights, but to save my life. Now let's take another objectivist standard of ethics. Lying. Lying is wrong.
So we got time there. So
Sure.
I
Lying is
believe he
wrong.
answered it, and I believe he answered in the affirmative that he would do what was necessary to preserve his life.
Without violating rights, though.
You
I'm not trying to steal his boat.
You said that you would violate his rights in this last example, even though the reason why you're violating them is not because you have any desire to violate them, it's because you want to save your life. That's the situation. But you would be objectively violating his rights, and that's the contradiction in your mind right now, because first you said that you wouldn't violate the rights. Then you said, well, you don't accept the premise of the question. Then you said you would violate the rights, but it's not really a violation of his rights because you didn't want to. You were trying to achieve a different end. That doesn't change the fact that you violated his property rights in the example you gave. So the answer is yes, you would violate the rights under extreme duress.
Testing. Okay.
That's
No,
what I want to know.
I do not consider it a violation of rights whatsoever. And in fact, and I think in a statist society or an anarchist society, that if I'm drowning and a person is trying to ward me off with his paddle, he's not doing it in the sense that he actually believes that his rights are being violated. It would be because, well, he's an asshole. He's psychotic. And I think that by a rational standard, most people would judge him to be as such. And the context does matter. If I break into somebody's home, that's B and A. I'm breaking into somebody's home without their permission or knowledge, and then they come home and there I am. If they shot me, that would be a case of, well, I asked for it. But if I step on his property to deliver a flyer to put into his mailbox, I'm still on his property, but it's not breaking and entry. Context is everything, absolutely everything, all things considered.
So I think he answered the question, but I think he might have challenged Jan's premise that the principle or the concept of rights exists in those kind of circumstances.
I want an answer. Was it yes or no? Will he violate somebody's rights when his life is at stake? And I gave an example which I explained why the life was at stake. He gave another example where he says his life is as at stake, but his intention is not to violate the person's rights, but he accepted that that the person had the right to his boat and that he was infringing on the property rights of the person. So I want to know, Victor, whether your answer is yes or no. Would you violate somebody's rights when your life depended on it? That's the question. And first you said no, and now you're saying yes. So I want to know, what is the answer to that question? Is it yes or no?
Well, no, I don't. I don't accept that I've contradicted myself. I did say that I would not violate somebody's rights, but at the same time too, in those situations, yes, I would fight for my life. Like I say, if somebody breaks into my house, wants to kidnap my child, for example, they ask me where my child is, and I lie. Uh, Lying doesn't become immoral in that context, even
Victor,
though it's a lie.
why is it not a
But
if it's
me
not a
fighting for my life
contradiction?
is not breaking somebody, is not violating somebody's right.
If it's not a contradiction, why don't you tell us why it's not a contradiction? Jan, you're on mute. You're on mute, Jan.
I'm asking for a ruling from the moderator to whether you have answered yes or no, and to ask you so that you can finally tell somebody whether you would violate somebody's rights under extreme duress. And
All right.
I created an example which was under extreme duress, but you said you wouldn't accept the premise that you were under extreme duress. So you created one where you said you were under extreme duress. And then you said your intention was not to violate his rights, which is irrelevant what your intention is. You did violate the guy's the guy who owns the boat's rights. So we want to know whether you would, under extreme duress, violate somebody's rights or not. And that's what I'm asking the moderator to ask you, so you can give a clear answer on that, so I know what next to ask.
Okay, I'll try the answering the question from another angle. Do mute up, gents. Okay. The context that's being provided is that I'm under extreme duress. I'm not of a predative state of mind, a predatory state of mind, or premeditated rather. That is not my state of mind. Is to bring harm to somebody, which would be violating their rights. I'm under a state of duress. That's the context. Now, if I were to steal the water or to lie to the kidnapper, I'm bad because I lied, or to steal water or to violate the guy's boat rights or whatnot. Context is I'm under a state of duress. Now, it might just be to the letter of the law, for example, that, well, I in fact did violate that person's rights. But it's even in our present system, let alone a rational, fully free system, be that a limited government or anarchist society, the issue of duress would be taken into consideration. It would be a relevant factor that would mediate rather any kind of punishment I were to incur. So under a state of duress, you're asking me if I would violate somebody's rights. It's possible that under a state of duress, I may just very well do that, unwittingly. I'm in a state of duress. I'm not of a rational state of sound of mind under circumstances like that.
Still on mute, Jan.
Was it a yes, moderator, that he will violate? Is that you're going to ask him
I think he. I thought I had a ruling, but now he seems to have changed his mind again. So I was going to say his answer was no, but now he just repeated and said yes.
But it's not. I'm not asking you. I'm asking you to ask Victor. The answer is yes. Just a yes or no. You say.
All right, Victor.
Is it yes?
What is your final answer? Is it yes or no?
My answer is that it's not a yes or no. Yes or no. Then in that case, I object to the premises of the question. I would say not yes or no.
You can object to the question if it has a false premise, but you haven't argued which is the false premise of the question. Are you arguing? Are you arguing that people cannot be under extreme duress and be faced with this kind of situation? Is that impossible? Is that what you're arguing, Victor?
If the context matters, am I stealing his vote of a conscious mind, or I'm trying to save my life under duress? That's the context. Of course, there's going to be a different consideration in whether the crime has been committed or not under that context. They're vastly different things.
I didn't ask you anything about a crime. I asked you whether you would do it.
The crime would be violating somebody's rights. That is what's under debate.
That's not what I'm asking you, Victor. I'm asking you, would you do it?
Would you take would you take the physical action to take the water? In other words, without legal.
All of us are in an echo chamber.
All right, so I heard the answer is yes, you would take the water, but no, it wouldn't be violating the person's rights to do so.
Yeah, there's echo chamber is different.
So the premise he disagreed with was that the two were one and the same.
Yeah, and I would also have a further objection that we've gone into an investigation of ethics of textbook ethics that are given to philosophy students that are faced with that are posed questions of
this is not a
this is supposed to be a debate about anarchism versus statism, not ethical inquiry specifically.
You have. This is not about arguing other points. I can ask whatever questions I think are relevant. You ask the ones that you think are relevant. You say that this question is not relevant.
We have to stick to the subject. I'd like a ruling on that. You can ask any question.
There's rules talking about that, but I think it probably would be up to Jan to decide what he thinks might be helpful to his argument, because you don't know where he's going to go with it later, right? So I don't see any problem with him asking a question.
I don't see him asking a question either. Germane to the subject matter, not whether we're talking about. Now we're talking about ethics. We've left the subject of the debate altogether.
You said that a political theory was part of ethics, and I'm investigating your ethics to see why you are willing to die.
I'm not willing to die. I'm fighting for my life.
No. Before you said you would die, and then now you say you wouldn't die, and that's the contradiction. That's the problem.
With the Woods example, say I would die. I'd say that I.
So you would violate NAP, would you not, in order to save your life?
I think I've answered these questions thoroughly.
Is it a yes or a no? I just want to know.
On what specific one you want to go with?
Jen, was the question would he violate someone's rights or would he take the water? Which of the two is the question?
What?
Was your question, would he violate someone's rights or would he take the water? What's specifically the question of the two?
The question is this. I've asked this question, the same question, 3 different ways.
I think
I've answered it in 7 different ways.
Would he violate somebody's rights under extreme duress if his life depended on it? I gave him an example that under the premises of my example, his life did depend on it, which was he's dying of thirst. There isn't anybody else in the woods. There's no other option. Either you steal the water and live or you don't. That was the question. And you said you wouldn't violate his rights, you wouldn't steal the water. Then later you made your own example about what you said was really extreme duress, and you said you wouldn't follow the principle, you would violate it. That's the contradiction, and I'm trying to get a straight answer on whether you would, under extreme duress, violate NAP.
Okay, now his question seems to be directed in the using the terminology of the non-aggression principle thing.
Yeah, you know, it is important to flesh it out with a concrete example. You can't ask a broad question like, under a state of duress, would you steal water? Or would you steal? Would you violate rights, rather? That would be the broad thing. So if you want to go with the Woods example, my answer still stands. We're just going to go circle around and around on this, is that I do not consider it a life and death situation.
That's irrelevant, Victor. Just is your connection okay?
Yes, can you hear me? Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I would try. Yeah, no, I would try whatever the melee that I find myself in, whether it's life or death threatening or whatnot. I do not see how I aid myself by violating somebody's rights as opposed to cooperating. I think I have a much better optimal chance of survival by respecting people, and I do not see this metaphysical clash that in order to survive, I must violate people's rights. And if this is a highly circumstantial situation of unlikely lifeboat scenarios, I consider it a very cynical look at ethics, which Rand posed.
Moderator, can you ask him if it was a yes or a no? Because he
is it a yes
doesn't
or no, Victor, in terms of would you violate someone's rights if you were in some life death?
My answer
Would
is
it be violating the
If
right?
your life depended on it, and if you didn't do it, you would die, Victor. That's the premise of the question.
No, I've tried to save my life free of violating somebody's rights.
That's not the question, whether you would try or not.
That's my answer.
If your life depended on it, would you violate NAP? That's what the question is. And that can happen.
Mute up. Okay. Consciously, deliberately, I would not violate somebody's rights. Under a state of duress, I may very well be the case of where I could be capable, under a state of duress, violate somebody's rights. Not consciously, though, deliberately, and in full conscience of what I'm doing. Duress has relevance in mediating a punishment, if there is to be punishment meted out against me, would be a consideration to, would be a part of the equation in the consideration of that.
All right.
Did I do it in a deliberate mind, or was I under duress?
I'm just gonna try to make a ruling. My understanding of what he's saying.
But I would not.
I think he says no. It's not a violation because it's a special circumstance.
Yes, the context.
It's not a violation of the person's property rights and that owns the water, and it's not a violation of the person's property rights that owns the boat. So you're not answering.
How can I make that? How can I know that under a state of duress? Context.
No, you know, what you're arguing is that you would do it, but that you're not responsible for your actions. Because when you stole the water, you didn't know what you were doing, right?
I think that one of the ways to solve this.
Is that what you're saying? Is that what you're arguing now?
if one of the ways to get out of this quagmire is a legitimate answer, as according to the rules of this debate, is that I don't know. Under the state of duress, I've never been in such a dire circumstance. We all can find out things about ourselves we didn't know we're capable of under such dire circumstances. So let's say that under a state of duress, I don't know.
Yeah, I think we're just gonna have to move on.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay, I'll go to my next question. My recommendation to you, Victor, is figure it out so that when if and when a situation like that happens, you make the right decision. So here's my next question. Would these DROs in the anarchist society have nuclear weapons?
Huddle testing. Okay. In an anarchist society, would there be nuclear weapons? You're asking me? I don't know. There's nothing like there's not a textbook of anarchist doctrines under page 4, section 8. Must have nuclear weapons or must not have nuclear weapons. I can't. That's maybe you want to clarify the question further.
Could there be nuclear weapons? Is that acceptable, Jan?
No, that's not the question. I said, would any of these DROs in an anarchist society have nuclear weapons, according to your view of what's probably going to happen?
I don't know. I don't know if there would be nuclear weapons. I don't know if we like go by a Bitcoin standard or reinstate the gold standard in a stateless society. I don't know. How am I supposed to predict what the market's going to turn and what's going to happen? What inventions are going to be brought to the fore?
But there's nothing in the anarchist principles that would preclude having nuclear weapons.
Of course not. And neither would be an anarchist doctrine that would necessarily exclude or include. It's not a religion.
Oh, okay, Victor. That's why I never ask anarchists that question, because they always say they don't know and they don't feel a responsibility to figure out what's going to happen. So just so that since you don't know, I'm going to make it simple for you. Let's analyze the two possibilities, the thing that the anarchists have not done. Let's analyze first the possibility that they do have nuclear weapons, okay? And then later we'll analyze the situation of when they don't. So we'll cover the whole universe, all the possibilities. Now, if they don't have nuclear weapons, right? They don't have nuclear weapons. What's the situation? What do you say your city should do if Putin or Kim Jong-un sends your city an extortion note in your anarchist society saying, pay us $10 billion or we will nuke you? What should your city do in the scenario that you and the other DROs don't have nukes?
Okay.
Okay, well, if the question doesn't preclude other weaponry, if we don't have nukes, certainly those weaponries would be employed. In the sense of sending this ransom note, I really haven't got my head around that question. Maybe it's something that you haven't thought out very thoroughly. Just exactly who is this note being sent to? Joe Palooka down on 284 Main Street? I mean, who's getting this note? I don't get that, though.
It's in the question. I said send to your DRO, the various DROs there in your city. Putin sends these DROs, they're the ones that are in charge of law and order in your city. If you don't pay, we're going to nuke your city. And you don't have any nuclear weapons. So what would you do? Would you pay or not? That's what I'm asking you. What do you think you should do?
Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. I had trouble with the mute there. Yeah. Okay. It's sent to the DRO. That clarifies it for me greatly. Thank you. That information would spread wide and far, of course, from DROs, and would become public knowledge of this threat. Well, that's not even a preemptive force. That is a threat. That's an out-and-out threat. Now, if there's no nukes, then we just can't fight by those means. But damn straight, then, if the question doesn't necessarily exclude all forms of weaponry, which I don't think would be the case, then there would be a mighty strike and fight to the bitter end under threat of force of that type. Just can't. But if there's no, according to your scenario, there's no nukes, but there's aircrafts and missiles, tanks, etc. Fight. That's my
Okay,
answer.
so you would go to war with Russia, or and start putting your men on ships and start getting ready to go over there and invade Russia or whatever, and as soon as Russia, Putin saw that you were taking military action, he nukes your city. Then he sends a note to the next city. Pay up $10 billion. He'll send it to those DROs in the next city. Pay up those pay up the 10 billion, or we're going to do exactly like we did to Victor Pross's city. We're going to nuke you. What should the next city do?
Well, okay. How many cities we're going to go through here? It's like, well, listen, it's still the same answer. That's a direct threat of force, right to the bitter end.
So they should start organizing and getting their ships ready and putting their young men on ships to go fight in Russia or whatever. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me, Victor? Look,
I'll answer it.
Conventional forces cannot oppose this threat, because by the time a ship gets from Canada to Russia, everything is nuked. And besides that, even if you did get to Russia, you would be destroyed there by their conventional weapons there, with just a minuscule amount of army that you would have from Canada with a DRO. So you would be destroyed. So obviously, you would have to pay up. Isn't that true?
So is that the sixth or seventh question now?
Six.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay, listen, Jan, I really sincerely want to answer your questions to the best of my ability. I think that what we're talking about is the logistics of it and military strategy, which is not germane to the subject of stateless society versus a limited government in place. Is no match, let's say, to the United States or to a militaristic Russia. That is true. That's true. But that's the circumstances how things are right now, and it's not germane to the issue of a stateless society versus a limited government. So I'm not necessarily disputing with you that whatever. Let's take the United States. If you decided to kick her ass, you could do a very thorough job of it. But what's that got to do with the subject matter at hand?
Look, I asked a question, and I want an answer, and I'm asking the moderator to ask you to answer the question. Does it make sense to self-suicide and not pay one city after another, or isn't it true that you would, any rational city, would pay up?
No, it's not a matter of city.
God damn it,
Moderator.
the moderator. I'm asking the moderator to instruct you to answer yes or no. Would you? Does it make sense to pay up, or is it your position that you should commit suicide?
Wait a minute.
All right, Victor. So, would you pay? Would you let them destroy you? Would you attack? Do you agree, disagree with one of the premise that those are the only options?
We're in an attack. Is that better? Yeah. No. Fight to the end. Do not pay up. Fight to the end. If you don't fight and you just pay up, it's embolden your enemy. And that's not an act of self-sacrifice.
All right. We look okay. Jan, you're yeah. Yeah, you're muted.
So you are willing to run that risk of losing your life and everybody else's life in Canada as a result of not paying the extortion note from Russia,
That's
which
what I
now
heard.
you don't receive because you have the implicit protection of the United States, and the predatory tendencies of Russia and North Korea are deterred by nuclear power. But okay, so if the DROs did have nukes, that was
So
the
this is
other
the seventh
possibility.
question.
Yeah, if the DROs did have nukes and they had a dispute between them, would you be willing to risk nuclear war in Canada as a result?
Sorry, could you just ask the question again? For clarification's sake, I'm not sure if I got it. Please ask.
Second scenario that is that the DROs do have nuclear weapons. Now you're not going to get the extortion note. And but are you willing to run the risk that the DROs will have a dispute and one of them will be a neocon and nuke the other one first, and you'll have a nuclear war inside of Canada? Do you think that's a reasonable risk to run that you have to run in an anarchist society? You're willing to run that risk? Are you willing to run that risk?
Well, sorry, mute up, James. This is a pretty loaded question. Well, you're willing to run that risk as if that was a metaphysical given. But for clarification of the question, though, you're suggesting that if two DROs had a dispute of some nature and decided one takes that form of disagreement to the point of nuclearing the other, applying a nuclear weapon against the other, one DRO nuking another DRO. If I understand correctly.
That's what I asked you twice.
Wow. That's pretty extreme, isn't it? No, that's not hardly realistic at all. I do not consider that a possibility. I mean, it's physically possible. It's just not plausible.
You're on mute, Jan.
What is it that's not possible that as clarification? Because he's not answering the question. He says that this is not possible. That it's not possible for them to have nuclear weapons. Of course they can. You said it before, right?
Yeah. Look, Jan, and mute up. This whole thing of a business, the DRO, a business for the purpose of making money, that is the nature of it. It's not a government where the rule of force is exerted against others for territorial reasons or to expropriate the resources of the people, where force is at hand all the time, just by the very nature of it. Here's it's a company, it's a business. Their whole modus operandi is to make money. They're not going to.
I want an answer to my question, moderator. Was it a yes or no? Or is he willing to run that risk?
I heard him object to the premise.
So then you have to ask, what is the objection, and what premise do you say is not true, moderator?
Yeah. So Victor. I heard him answer. He objected to the premise, and the reason was why, because they're in business to make money. Victor, that was your answer.
So this whole idea of the disagreement taking place in the form of nuking. I mean, do I understand how devastating a nuclear force is within one's own country to apply them to somebody else? And that person and that DRO and the individuals who comprise it, or can consider themselves a communist?
Oh boy.
It's not realistic. There could be all types of problems.
This is a moderator. He's violating the rules. He says that my question isn't realistic. That's not. You cannot make that objection. What the only objection you can make, Victor, is does the question contain a false premise? And if it does, it's up to you, Victor, to argue which premise and why you think it's false. You can't just disregard questions and say, well, I don't want to ask, it's not realistic.
So, Jan, I heard an argument. I don't know if
that's just a way of evading.
He gave his argument was that they're in the business to make money, so that's why the premise is false.
What is that? That has nothing to do with what we're talking about. The issue is, if you know what the question was, if they do have nuclear weapons,
yes,
and they have a dispute, and one of them is a neocon, a dispute, yes, they both sincerely believe that they're right. They both think that they're defending the individual rights of their clients. Are you willing to run the risk that one of them will preempt the other and nuke him?
What does it mean to run the risk?
Are you willing to have a scenario where there is this risk? That's what it means, willing to run the risk. What do you think it means?
Actually, I don't see it as a risk. I don't accept that premise.
Oh, it's not possible that can happen.
That's what he said. He said because they're just to make money, so they won't put themselves in that situation.
Yes, and I think that they would anticipate ahead of time, as business people, ahead of time, that there would be two ROs that would conflict on it, and then they would leave that to a third impartial arbiter. Because they would anticipate that there would be.
So there's his argument.
You have to think of all these.
Wait a second. You know, I asked for a clarification.
Not even Data's government.
Whether he would answer, whether he was willing to run the risk or not, and so he doesn't want to answer. It's okay. You're willing to run the risk, I guess.
Does this mean
I'm going to rule that he objected to the premise that it would be a scenario and therefore it could be a risk?
Does this mean that California is
which premise did he object?
That scenario could happen.
That they can have nuclear weapons?
And be in that scenario.
Now, which one exactly? I see you arguing for him, so I'll just talk to you. Which premise, since Victor doesn't tell me, in my question, does he object to?
I don't know.
Well, then why do you say that he's objecting to the premise?
Because I heard him.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Let's ask something else. It doesn't matter.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you think criminal gangs under anarchism will attack individuals that are not organized as well as security agencies they consider weaker than themselves?
Sorry, could you ask once again for clarification?
Do you think criminal gangs will attack individuals that are not organized, that don't have DRO protection, as well as security agencies they consider weaker than themselves?
Okay.
It's a fair question. Yeah, sure. those individuals who don't have DROs, and then they're attacked, and so they're not privileged for the advantages and protection of a DRO because
What
they've been
happened here?
assigned.
Hold on, Jan. Put yourself on mute.
Something came up here. I don't know what it is.
I don't see anything. On my side.
Well,
All right, go ahead, Victor. We'll start over.
Yeah. No, it's a good question. I mean, like, certainly DROs are entirely voluntary, and but it doesn't mean that some people wouldn't take the precautions of taking advantage of the services being offered, and then that might be considered like a free rider problem or whatnot. But any gang, I don't know who this gang is, right? Whatever, it's just violent crimes, let's say. Maybe if you were to ask the question, are violent crimes possible under an anarchist society? Certainly, certainly. But whether somebody's officially assigned to a DRO or not, I think that they would still, a DRO probably, if we could keep that to the perimeters of settling contractual disputes. But if a person has no need for contracts and does everything on a handshake, it doesn't mean that he wouldn't be there wouldn't be a police force. A police force is not anthem to anarchism. They would just be the private police force. And the police force would be at hand to take care of such violent criminals.
okay, time.
Time.
Moderator,
Yep.
can you ask him whether it was a yes or a no?
Was that a yes or no, Victor?
Well, it's not necessarily a yes or no question.
It depends.
The question is a yes or no question. I just asked you, and you didn't answer yes or no. And so I'm asking the moderator to inform you to answer yes or no.
Square the question again, but it comes down to yes or no.
I asked this question 2 times already. I'll ask it again. If you didn't know what the question is, how could you answer it before? Do you think criminal gangs will attack individuals that are not organized? This is under an anarchist scenario. Organized in the sense that they are not signed up with any DRO, as well as security agencies they consider weaker than themselves. Will criminal gangs in the anarchist society do that kind of thing?
All right, let me ask him. Victor, your answer was yes, correct?
Yes, it is certainly possible that violent crimes will take place. What are the repercussions that will
All right, well, Jen,
consequence?
hold on. We have it confirmed. The answer is yes.
Yes, violent crimes can take place.
Do you think some of these security agencies will fight back and create a little war?
This is question 9, Jan?
No, this is question 7.
Okay. Wait a second.
Do you think some of these security agencies will fight back and create a little war?
No.
Yeah,
Just to clarify, so your view is that none of the security agencies will fight back. So, okay. That's correct, right? Okay.
Yeah, no, I don't see any war
Okay.
being a result
Okay.
of a business. It's like you don't have Burger King and
Okay.
McDonald's.
None of them will fight back. That's great. Okay.
None of them will aggress.
Wait a second. Let me ask a question. When there is a government, criminal gangs are completely outgunned. But if the government is removed, they have a chance to outgun citizens and DROs. The question is, will criminal gangs be incentivized to acquire military hardware so they can prevail over the DROs, especially the weak ones, and thus have a greater pool of potential victims from which to expropriate wealth by force.
Okay, are you talking about the criminal gang overtaking an entire geographical area or a specific group of people?
Well,
No, I'm saying that right now, under the present situation where there's a government, it doesn't matter how, there's no incentive for criminal gangs to acquire tanks or attack helicopters or drone bombers, because that just makes it easier for the police to find them and put them in jail. So when they rob a bank, they got to get the hell out of there as soon as possible before the police get there, because the police, the government, has more firepower than they do. But when you remove the government, there's a situation where if now they have a tank, they can just park it right in front of the bank, and the bank has to deliver. If the DRO just has a few policemen there in the tank, they got their attack helicopter, they got their drone bomber there. They are incentivized. My question is, are they not incentivized to acquire this military hardware to increase the pool of potential victims, like happens in the jungle? The more power you have, the more potential victims will be at your mercy.
Yeah, well, actually, it sounds like you're describing state society to me, because the government is that overwhelming institution of force that overtakes the population of people. When you want to set up into an anarchism, description of statism. Mute up,
Before I mute up, the question is, will criminal gangs be incentivized to acquire military hardware so they can prevail over the DROs and thus have a greater pool of victims from which to expropriate wealth by force?
No, I don't consider this a realistic scenario whatsoever, because we are not talking about a completely disarmed population where, let's say that those citizens got their weapons imported because there's none to be had domestically. That's not a realistic scenario whatsoever. They are outnumbered. And if they were to exert that kind of force, we're not talking about somebody waving a knife in your face or a gun. If you're talking about a tank, for Christ's sakes, this is not going to be a completely disarmed population. And for the people that will rally to save their lives and to preserve their property, they don't have a chance, tank or no tank. They don't have a chance. They will be outnumbered and overpowered. That's how I see it anyway.
All right.
That's one kick-ass tank, I'm telling you, for to overtake an entire country. But I do give you credit.
I'm trying to figure out what is it that you're disputing, Victor. Are you disputing that with military hardware, attack helicopters, tanks, etc., they will not have a greater pool of potential victims?
No, they don't have a greater pool. Why is the scenario such that they have a greater
Because
pool?
there's more people that are weaker that can't oppose them. That's why.
Everybody in the country?
No, they only attack the weak ones.
Well, the strong ones will come to the defense.
Why should they if they're not paying for the service?
Yeah, but what?
Problem.
Because they'll be next.
Oh, they're going to give everybody free service, right? Why should anybody pay? Okay.
All right. Well, I think we got answers to that one. So, what are we, ninth question now?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what is the... will some of the people running security agencies decide to initiate force against less armed citizens?
Sounds like a variant of the same question.
No, it's a different question.
Will some people over try to force against other people? Is the question.
Will some of the people running the security agencies, the DROs, decide to initiate force against less armed victims?
Oh, the DROs themselves. Okay, right. The institutions that are in the business of making money,
Unmute yourself,
and
Jeremy.
I figure there's stock option plans, and also to appease the investors and the executives of the board. The profit chart is to exert force over other people. Well, they thereby become criminals, and they will be dealt with accordingly by other people in the jurisdiction.
Was the answer to the question yes or no? Moderator.
Was it yes or no?
The answer is that they would fight. If you're asking me if a DRO is going to
I didn't
attack,
ask if they would fight. Ay, ay, ay.
would DROs attack people who are just the customer base, or who are non-DRO?
I said, would any DROs, some, decide to initiate force against less armed citizens?
As a DRO, quad DRO. No. That's not to say that violent crime wouldn't be possible.
Okay, so all of them will be angels. None of them will be tempted into predation and decide to go the predation route.
Why? Because they have weapons? They'd have to deal with other DROs that have.
They will attack the weak, not the strong. You don't understand the law of the jungle.
Your answer is no.
I see this variant as the previous question. It hasn't really been changed up.
Okay, the answer is no.
All right, that was the ninth question.
Okay, well that's I'm tired. I don't have any voice left. Let's go to the whatever, the summary, and let's finish this thing.
The affirmative
vote. Any answers to my questions?
3 minutes. So you each get a 3-minute summary.
Who goes first?
Who do you think?
Affirmative. Victor. 3 minutes. When you're ready.
Well, you know, you'll have to hold up. There we go. Are we good?
Yep.
Okay. Well, as Rothbard and many others have suggested, rational self-interest would generate cooperation among different agencies. The result would probably be a type of confederation, in fact, since we've been dealing with this whole question of people throwing flamethrowers and nuclear weapons at each other in the same geographical area. So let's go with that. Let's ride with that. War, DRO. Now, suppose that two different agencies reach different verdict in a criminal case. Is it so difficult to imagine that these agencies would have agreed beforehand to submit such disputes to an impartial third-party arbitration agency? Are they psychotics? Is this what we're speaking of as human nature being reduced to? In a society that has reached the point of being stateless in the first place, based on the recognition, the philosophical recognition of individual rights, is how we would get to such a society. Whether that be a limited government would be a progress of a moral evolution. A stateless society would be the final destination. And if we do believe Rand, such agencies would have no recourse except to go to war with one another. That's the premise of what these questions are coming from. We might as well say that Canada and the U.S. have no recourse except war in cases that involve overlapping jurisdictions. We don't even have that in a statist society. So it's nonsense. So now, orthodox objectivists seem to think that they are exempt from reading what their opponents have actually said, and instead they spin these imaginary opponents and scary, hellish scenarios out of their ass and attack those fantasies. In actuality, violations of rights and improper use of coercion has actually been the norm under government. How long do I have still, Mr. Moderator?
1 minute left.
1 minute. Okay, now we learned from Rand that philosophy, not politics, is primary. An ideal Randian government could emerge and be sustained only in a society with a very high percentage of rational people. This is what's put before us. And that also applies to not only objectivism, but to libertarian framework as well. Only if a substantial percentage of a population understands and respects individual rights will a truly limited government be possible, and an anarchist society as well.
20 seconds remaining. All right, is that it?
That's okay.
Okay.
Jan can take it.
All right, Jan.
Okay, as I explained before, arbitration is a mirage because there's no happy medium between differences of opinion as to what is the right statutory age for rape, or whether it's abortion or not, or whether the right age for contract. So you cannot arbitrate those things satisfactorily for both parties. The problem with Victor's view is that he doesn't want anarchism right now as things are. He says eventually he would like anarchism, but I would like limited government right now. And so when you are arguing for a political theory and you're trying to identify what the optimum is, and you want to get as close as you can to the optimum, well, if I was handed the optimum, which is exactly limited government right now, I would take it. But Victor cannot take anarchism right now. Why? Because people aren't angels. They will have disputes. There will all the problems that I presented. How anarchism incentivizes criminality because of the unprotected people. It incentivizes a military arms race because the more arms everybody gets, the more power they have. Because it's based on the law of the jungle. Whoever is stronger is the one who imposes their will. And of course, the end of that game is nuclear weapons, because that's the mother of all weaponry. And so whoever ends up with nuclear weapons would dominate all of Canada or all of the United States if the other ones didn't have nuclear weapons. And that becomes pretty easy to see. And the first ones who will see it are the criminals, who will start increasing their military hardware to have a greater pool of victims, which apparently Victor can't grasp. Now, Victor contradicts himself all over the place in this debate, and is unwilling to answer a whole bunch of questions, and it's very hard to get a straight answer. So when he is under extreme duress, he says he will not violate the rights of a person. But then later he says, yes, he will. And then thirdly, he says, well, I don't know. Well, he's all over the board. Now, my recommendation to Victor and everybody else listening is figure it out before you encounter this kind of situation so you don't make the wrong choice. Obviously, the right choice is you have to violate the other person's rights. If your life is your ultimate value, as Victor said it was. But if you hold this principle of NAP outside of its context, then you will make a mistake. So just for the benefit of everyone, the context of the NAP principle is that there is a limited government and that you are not under extreme duress. When you apply it in that context, it works perfectly well. So that's what you have to do to resolve that quandary. And there's a lot of other contradictions here, or statements that don't seem to make any sense. For example, he says none of the security agencies are ever going to fight back. Well, then what's the point in signing up with them if they don't fight for your rights? Those are going to be the first targets that the criminal gangs will attack. They'll figure out which ones are the pussies, and they're going to attack them first. Which one just have a few policemen and they submit everything to arbitration and they'll never go to war about anything, and those are the ones that will fight back. But no. Victor, for example, when he receives the extortion note, he will then, what will he do? First, he will immolate himself. When he doesn't have nukes, he said he'll fight. Well, you can't fight if you are underarmed, and you just have to hand over your wealth, and your wealth will be depleted. This is an obvious conclusion. That's why anarchism doesn't work for self-defense against foreign tyrants. The foreign tyrants are also incentivized to send extortion notes and loot American or Canadian citizens because they're defenseless. Because a anarchist society is not a military opponent that will inspire any fear in them. And they don't have to come here to invade us. They just have to send those little notes. That's it. And either you pay or you are nuked. And having conventional weapons like Bloch suggested, that doesn't work. And immolation like Victor and Rothschild suggested, it's a bad choice. You have to follow your ultimate value, and your principles all have to be means to achieve your ultimate value. And that's the reason why I bring up these issues of ethics, because the principle of NAP has to be a means to achieve your ultimate end. When it doesn't function in that way, it's not functioning correctly. It's not a right principle. And you're not it is a right principle, but you're not applying it in the right context. You're trying to apply it in a context it doesn't apply. So I want to thank Victor for this debate, and I did the best I could under my cold, and I'm losing my voice, so I really don't have too much power to continue arguing. I would hope next time that we could get clearer answers to the questions, and when the question is a yes or no answer question, that finally I will be able to get the answer of what is it, yes or no. And unfortunately that didn't happen here. So thank you for both of you for doing the debate, and I have to go to the bathroom.
Okay, I do thank you. And I do commend you for undertaking the very thick, and I hope it's over soon, Jan.
Okay.